Ja som pred hodinou avizoval prestávku, hodina ubehla, takže teraz budeme avizovať to, čo nás čaká, na čo sa všetci tešíme. Noc výskumníkov, 16. ročník, pokračuje aj popoludní a toto je druhá etapa, ktorá má takisto svoje výmoženosti, svoje peknoty, svoje pravidlá. Jednak, že budeme mať veľa zaujímavých prednášok a prednášať budú nielen slovenskí vedci, ale aj zahraniční. Že budeme mať naozaj veľa krásnych ukážok a že sa budeme aj trošku zabávať. Takže toto je to, čo nás čaká. Samozrejme aj v rámci nejakého oficiálneho otvorenia, ktoré príde o trošku neskôr. No ale keď hovorím o tom, že máme aj zahraničných respondentov, respektíve prednášajúcich, tak v tomto prípade to platí. Pán Brandon Haber bude rozprávať o živote na Titane, najväčšom mesiaci planéty Saturn. No a pán Brandon Haber pracuje na univerzite Johna Hopkinsa v laboratóriu aplikovanej fyziky, kde je zodpovedný za vedenie a plánovanie projektu Dragonfly, technickú architektúru a systémové inžinierstvo. Predtým bol v Blue Orange ako riaditeľ softwarového inžinierstva pre ich kozmickú loď New Shepard, komerčnú nosnú raketu pre suborbitálnu vesmírnu turistiku. No a tiež vyvinul software pre vesmírne lode NASA, volajú sa Space Shuttle a Orion, takže v túto chvíľu prednášať bude naozaj človek výsostne povolaný, ale tým, že je zďaleka, tak sme urobili taký telemost, a všetko bude prednahraté, všetko to bude pripravené, to znamená v rámci toho nie live telemostu, ale predsa len veľmi aktuálneho telemostu, vám tú prednášku práve teraz prinášame. Nech sa páči.
Firstly, let me thank you for the honor of having this interview for the European Researchers Night event. With me here today is Brandon Haber, the flight software lead for the Dragonfly mission, which is a NASA program to send a drone to Saturn's largest moon, Titan. Haber currently works at Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab, where he is responsible for Dragonfly's project leadership and planning, technical architecture, and system engineering. Previously, he worked as Director of Software Engineering at Blue Origin and developed software for NASA's Space Shuttle and Orion spacecraft. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, could you please outline your path to software engineering?
Yeah, so it started at a young age. I took computer classes in high school. I knew I wanted to be a software engineer, but I had no clue then that I wanted to work in space. I actually started off wanting to make video games.
Oh, really?
Yep, and so I played a lot of video games as a kid, wanting to play video games, wanting to make video games. And it wasn't until much later when a friend of mine encouraged me to apply to work on the Space Shuttle program, as a college student, that I considered working in the space industry.
So you moved very easily to my next question, which was why did you get involved with space industry? So I can follow up on that. Yep. So why do you think space is important and how your work benefits us here on Earth?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different reasons that can happen. So space exploration as a whole teaches us more about the universe. So when we explore Titan, one of the reasons that we're exploring Titan is to understand more about what Earth may have been like billions of years ago before life arose. So understanding the science behind Earth is an important part of what Dragonfly's mission is to Titan. But there's also all sorts of other applications for space, whether it's communication satellites or navigation systems that help you know where you are around the world. It takes spacecraft to do all of those things. And so whether you're exploring other planets or whether you're orbiting satellites around the Earth, it's really all to benefit life on Earth in the beginning.
Yeah. So you mentioned already the video games. So what other roles did you have in your career?
Yeah, so pretty much most of my professional career has been in software. So I'm a software engineer by trade. I just happen to work in the space industry. And so I've worked on the Space Shuttle and Orion programs. I've worked on some other private space missions as well. I've worked on Airbus aircraft, the Airbus A220 briefly, as well as some medical devices, all in software before working at Blue Origin, where I worked for 5 years on the New Shepard spacecraft and rocket. and then now at the Applied Physics Lab. So it's all just been a journey. All of those things take software to run, whether it's an aircraft or a medical system or a rocket. There's software in each of those, and so I've enjoyed being able to help work on them.
Oh, that's so many things. I mean, wow. And so tell me, how does your regular day look like? When you manage all of these things, it seems impossible for me that you have time for all of that.
If I figure that out, I'll let you know.
Okay.
No, the best part about it, it's a little bit of a cliche, but the best part is that there isn't a typical day. And so in the course of a mission like Dragonfly, we're still in the early stages of it. It's not going to launch for another 5 years. So we're still designing the systems that are going to fly. We haven't even started building it. So right now, the typical day involves talking with a lot of different people, understanding more about what the software has to do, designing the software. We're just now getting into the phase where we're even writing any of the code. We'll write a bunch of code for a few years, build all of that stuff, and then we have to actually put it all together. So when we start actually integrating Dragonfly, that's when things get really interesting, because of course when you start building something for the very first time, it doesn't always work the first time you do it. And so fixing all of those problems, changing all of those things in enough time to actually make it to the launch pad, that's where things get a lot more interesting. So there may be a typical day for a couple of months, and then a couple of months later, the typical day changes again because you're working farther along in the same project.
Then how many hours per day do you spend programming?
Ooh, well, me personally, because I'm the flight software lead now, so I manage a team of programmers. I don't actually get to write as much code as I used to. So that's a little sad. I wish I got to write more. But I work with the people really that do, and I used to be able to do it many hours a day. These days, you know, my work day is 8 or 9 hours a day. So it's not too bad.
Do you enjoy it more, working with people or writing the software? Because, you know, it's a completely different thing to do.
Yeah, it is. But for a system like Dragonfly or New Shepard or any other large aerospace system, no one person can do it alone, right? So that's a big thing, is that it always takes teamwork, not just more than one software engineer, but it takes electrical engineers and mechanical engineers and fluids engineers and everybody else. So in order to write the software, you have to know what the software is to write. And that means talking to other people. It means working as a team. So it's very rare, actually, that you can just write code for 8 hours a day, you know, for weeks on end. There's always discussions and meetings and trying to figure out what the code is to write in the first place.
So how big is your development team that works with you on a daily basis?
Right now, it's about 4 or 5 people. It's actually a very small team. We'll grow over the next year or so as the team ramps up, now that we've got most of our design in place. So we'll end up getting around 15 people or so. And then we'll keep that size team roughly stable for another couple of years after that. But it's really a small group of people that it takes to do a mission like this.
Now, maybe a question for young IT students. What programming language do you mostly use?
That's a great one. So a lot of C and C++ in particular. So the flight software for Dragonfly is all written in C. And we have heritage software that's been used for 20 years or more now that's going to fly on Dragonfly. So we've been developing the C code for a very long time. We also use a lot of Python, some Perl, and some Java all around. But the main flight software is written in C.
And the heritage software you mentioned, is any of that in Fortran? I know that's some of the code.
Luckily not.
Okay, that's very lucky.
Yep.
Okay, so maybe we could move on already to the Dragonfly mission. I have a lot of questions about that. Could you tell me more about the mission itself and why choose Titan for the destination? Yeah,
so Titan's a very interesting world. It's got a thick atmosphere, like Earth, actually denser than Earth's, and it's got a low gravity. When the Cassini mission and the Huygens mission, built by the European Space Agency, went to visit Saturn and Titan in the 2000s, they discovered that Titan is a hugely interesting world. It has a methane cycle, like the water cycle here on Earth. So liquid methane is in lakes and rivers on the surface. It can condense into clouds and rain again, liquid methane rain. There's chemistry happening in the atmosphere, photochemistry. The interaction of the sun's energy with molecules in the atmosphere means that you can get very complex molecules that you couldn't get on an airless world. When you combine that with the mixing that is associated with the winds from the atmosphere and the methane cycle and the rain, it means that you can get some very complex chemistry on the surface of Titan. And so we think that chemistry, the chemical compounds that are present on Titan, may be similar to what Earth looked like before life arose. So we use the term prebiotic chemistry. We don't necessarily expect to find life on Titan, but we expect to find many of the ingredients for it and to be able to study those because, of course, we can't visit Earth 4 billion years ago, so we have to go visit Titan to try to understand that better.
Okay, I get that. So it's like we're like no other.
Yep.
And now, with regards to the flight software, what is the communication delay between Titan and Earth?
Yeah, so that varies, of course, as both of them orbit the Earth, but it ends up being about 1.5 hours each way, so about 3 hours round trip. Saturn ends up being about 1 billion kilometers from Earth, and so that's about how long it takes.
So 3 hours about.
Yep.
So does this mean that the system on Dragonfly has to be fully autonomous?
Completely. So we will tell it what to do many hours and even days and weeks in advance. But when Dragonfly, as a drone, when it flies on Titan, each flight will only be about 30 minutes or so long. So with a 3-hour light time delay, the whole takeoff, flight, and landing has to be completely autonomous.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, the missions that were there before, they lasted only for about 90 minutes, I think.
Correct.
So, and then what happened? Like, did the spacecraft got destroyed, or?
Yep. Yeah, so the only mission that actually has landed or been through the atmosphere of Titan is the European Space Agency Huygens mission. And that was designed to study Titan's atmosphere. And so it wasn't even necessarily designed to land. It only had a battery for a power source, and there was no way to recharge it. So it was only going to last a very short period of time, take whatever measurements it could in just that few hours, send them back to the Cassini orbiter, and then from there back to Earth. And so that's the only pictures that we have from Titan's surface were from that Huygens mission. And so, yeah, with the battery there, it would have run out of power and frozen on Titan's surface just a few minutes after it landed.
So this one will have better battery, longer life, and it will last much longer.
We expect it to last hopefully at least 3 years is our primary mission on Titan. And because it's a drone, of course, we'll be able to visit more than one place. We expect actually to be able to visit and fly many kilometers at a time. And hopefully over that 3 years or so, fly about 150 kilometers from where we started. So be able to see a lot of different places around the surface of Titan.
But 3 years in human time, and what is the time on Titan?
So Titan, Earth, or Saturn's year, I think, is about 30 Earth years or so. I don't remember exactly. So we won't see very much seasonal variation when we're there. But a Titan day is 16 Earth days. So about 2 days on Titan, or about a month here on Earth. And so, yeah, about 3 Earth years is how long we expect the mission to last.
Okay. And how reliable is the uplink between Earth and the Dragonfly, or will be?
Yeah, I hope very reliable, and we're working on that right now. Actually, the data rates, both uplink and downlink, are two of the biggest constraints on the mission, mostly because of energy and because the antenna has to fit all the way down into the lander. Unlike Mars missions take advantage of orbiters that are orbiting Mars that can relay data back to Earth, and we won't have anything like that. There's no other spacecraft around Saturn, so we have to talk all the way directly back to Earth from our lander. So we expect our uplink and downlink rates to be very low, but we think they're sufficient.
All right. So if you were to take an image and then send it back to Earth, how many times do you need to send the picture to really get it here safely?
Only once. So we have various things that'll tell us, for example, if we send a whole image, if there's a little part of it that's missing, we'll be able to send only that little part again. And so being able to optimize to not have to send the whole image over again should help us a lot. So there's various protocols involved that are implemented in the flight software to make sure that we only have to resend exactly what we need to resend.
Oh, that's smart. Yep. And then how many computers are on board? Will be?
A lot of them, actually, but most of them are only very small computers that control just their own local system. So the instruments, for example, all the different scientific instruments that we're carrying, most of them have their own computer on board inside the instrument, but it's only just controlling that instrument. The main flight software controlling the lander, there's 2 of them, and it will be running identical software on both of them. And so one will be controlling the lander, and the other will be ready to take over in case there's a problem.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask. Like, what is the redundancy on if the one computer breaks? So there's going to be a backup.
We do have a backup.
Perfect. So how much data are the sensors producing, and how much of it will be actually sent back to Earth?
Yeah, so over the course of the 3 years or so, we expect to be able to bring back on the order of at least 10 gigabits of data. So a little over a gigabyte of data is all we get, So a thumb drive, can carry far more data than we expect to get back from Saturn. But each of the instruments, some of them generate a little bit more than others. Of course, we have our cameras to be able to take large images and very high resolution images. But I'm not sure exactly what the split ends up being between each instrument.
But then it will evaluate right on spot, right? Like we'll process the, for example, there's a mass spectrometer on board,
there
right?
is.
So it will directly process the images and then send you back just the data, or?
So I think for the mass spectrometer, that's actually one of our bigger data users. For a lot of the pictures, though, for example, what we're going to do is we're going to compress the images and thumbnail them, so bring them down to a very low resolution and compress them to send them back. And then the scientists can take a look at it and say, actually, we think we want the higher resolution version of that image. And then we can bring the much bigger image back down. And so that way we can optimize our downlink usage and only take the big images that we need.
All right, so you're going to decide on spot, like this is the one we're particularly interested in.
Yep.
And then
But it takes a while, of course, to make that decision. We may downlink the small image, and then it takes us a week, to both decide and then send up the commands to bring the full resolution image down. So it's not necessarily in real time.
So I believe there's going to be a lot of scientists involved in that, right?
A lot, yes.
Like evaluating the data on spot.
Yep.
Oh, so what do you think is the most sophisticated component on the software design?
One of the things that we're doing that's a little bit new is we're doing a lot of compression on board. And so we've spent a lot of time studying, the best compression algorithms that we might use. We've analyzed data from previous space missions with the different compression algorithms to decide, this one compresses the data this well, another algorithm compresses the data that well. So that's actually one of the more interesting things that we're doing. The protocols that I mentioned earlier, in order to send back only data that's missing, maybe that had a problem with the radio link down, that's another one, that protocol. It's actually an open standard protocol called CCSDS File Delivery Protocol, or CFDP. Probably the most complicated part of the flight software, though, is the fact that there's 100 little things. It all has to work. There's not necessarily any one part of it that really worries me. It's about getting all the 1,000 different things to work right.
All right, so that's the most difficult. That's what I wanted to ask in the next question. Like, what's the most challenging piece of the mission, but for you in particular?
Yeah, that's really it, is that, there's 1,000 different things. Dragonfly is a hugely complex spacecraft, even by spacecraft standards. There's a lot of sensors. There's a lot of different things between the thrusters and the rotors that can move around. There's a complex radio. Optimizing all of those things and making sure that all of them work is the hard part. It doesn't matter how well we fly to Titan if we can't fly when we get there.
Oh, yeah. So do you know which idea came first, the Ingenuity, the helicopter, and the Perseverance, or the Dragonfly? And if it was Dragonfly, what lessons learned from Ingenuity were applied in the development?
Yeah, so I'm not actually sure because I wasn't involved with the early stages of Dragonfly, but I think it's probably Ingenuity because I think Dragonfly really took shape probably about 5 years ago. The very first people started working on it. The idea behind it may be older than that, I'm not sure, and I think Ingenuity is a little bit older. We've worked closely with the Ingenuity team to get lessons learned from them, especially on their operations and some of the issues that they've had on Mars. But they're really a very different scale. So Ingenuity is about 2 kilograms. Dragonfly is over 800 kilograms. So they're very, very different scales. There's actually a book being written, I think it might have just been published, by Ralph Lorenz, a member of the Dragonfly team, comparing the Ingenuity and Dragonfly designs. So I have to plug his book a little bit and say that'll answer that question a lot better than I can.
So the next topic I wanted to address is the work you've done on the Space Shuttle and the Orion software.
Yep.
So could you describe your experience working with NASA's Space Shuttle software? So I presume the software was built sometime around the 70s when it started.
Correct.
So were there any difficulties with that?
Yeah, so of course I wasn't even alive in the 70s when the software was first being written. So I joined the Space Shuttle program as an undergraduate, as an intern in 2006. And so the program was already being retired. The Columbia accident had happened a few years before, and NASA had already declared that the program would end in just a few more years. So I was working as an intern on one of the flight software teams. And so mainly what I was working on was some of the tools to help test the software and make sure that any of the last changes that were going to go into the software would still work. And so the software, even though it had mostly been developed in the 1970s, there were constant changes that were being made, improvements, bug fixes, everything. A new space shuttle launch might launch every 2 or 3 years with a new batch of software to control it. New improvements, new displays for the astronauts, for example, new ways for them to see what was going on. And so I worked on some of those tools that helped test that software. But because the shuttle program was retiring, Orion was just starting up at that time. And so that was when I made the transition to the Orion flight software team. And that was the very new thing at the time. The space shuttle was being retired, Orion was being designed, it was the next big thing. And so I worked on, again, some of the tools to help test the Orion flight software in the very early stages, the very early prototypes of that design for Orion. So, yep.
And you mentioned you were intern, so that was after you finished university or
before? Before, yeah. So I did several internships at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, in 2006 through 2008, and then I graduated college in 2009.
All right, so you already knew that you will go for space, right?
Yeah, no, I graduated college with my dream job to go work on the Orion flight software. I was very lucky in that regard. But I almost didn't even apply for the job on the space shuttle at all. So.
How did you get the job, if I may ask?
Yeah, so I had a friend that was working actually at Kennedy Space Center. So I went to school and grew up in Florida, and Kennedy Space Center, where the shuttles launched from, was very nearby. I had a friend working there that encouraged me to apply for one of those jobs. And I didn't. I resisted doing it because there was no way that I was smart enough to work on the space shuttle. No way. And so eventually, though, he kept encouraging me to apply. I looked for jobs at Kennedy Space Center, and there weren't any software jobs. I was majoring in computer science, and there weren't any. And then he said, oh, no, all the software is written in Houston, Texas, at the Johnson Space Center, a different NASA base. And so I applied for one of those jobs out there, and I got lucky. So.
All right, so the world is watching as NASA prepares its return to the moon with Artemis missions. What role have you had in the effort?
Yeah, so that was the job I was just mentioning on Orion. So Orion is the spacecraft being built to carry humans to lunar orbit, and working very closely with the European Space Agency, of course, which is building the service module for Orion. And so I did work a long time ago now on the flight software for the Orion spacecraft. So I have not worked on the SLS rocket, but I'm very excited to see it launch soon.
So yeah, that's what I wanted to ask next. Were you involved in the Orion during the Constellation program?
Yes, I was.
SLS. Oh.
Yep.
So where will you be for the Artemis 1 launch?
Ooh, it depends on when it launches. Probably at my desk watching. Every launch, every first launch especially is a difficult one. And there've been some of the scrubs already. It's going to go up successfully, I hope, pretty soon. But it's a little far of a drive for me to drive down for it.
So, what are the current plans for Dragonfly missions? What major milestones are coming up next?
Yeah, so we're just through some of our early design reviews right now, and we're working on the next big one. So we're still very much in the design phase before we go into actually building the flight components and then putting it all together. So the next big milestones for us are mostly those design reviews, where we bring in, external people that don't work on Dragonfly, even many people that don't work at APL or even at NASA, to come look at our designs and give us feedback and make sure that if there's any problems with our designs, we catch those early before we start building everything. But then in a few years, we'll actually start building things and putting it all together, and then our launch is in 2027. So still got a ways to go for that.
I had one question here, which you just suggested. So how many people are really checking your code before it gets deployed?
Ooh, so that's a really great question. So one of the things that we do have what's called an independent acceptance test team. So each developer, each flight software engineer is mostly responsible, at least initially, for testing their own code. They can write their code, they can use it in a simulator, they can make sure at least that they have some confidence that what they did was right. But one of the parts of APL's software process in particular is having an entirely separate team of people that just tests the software. And so they're responsible for making sure that all of the high-level functions work, even though they didn't write any of the code at all. This is somewhat common in high-reliability software, to have a completely different team that's responsible for testing it. And so they'll have our backs and make sure they catch any problems.
Perfect. And what's the size of the software or the program, like roughly?
The whole Dragonfly mission? Right now, I think we're several hundred people, and that's just the APL team, which is the main team. But we have partners all over the world, including in Europe, members of DLR and CNES working on Dragonfly. We have universities around the United States working on Dragonfly. I'm sure we'll have scientific partners at places that I don't even name, don't know, can't name. And so I'm sure that the number is going to end up being well into the thousands by the time we're done.
So that's for the people. And what's the size of the program itself? How big is the code?
Oh, how big is the code? Oh, boy. When we're done with it, I'll let you know.
All right, it's still a long way to go, I presume.
Yeah. I mean, it's maybe less than you'd think. The code that we're responsible for is probably going to be several 100,000 lines of code. But something like a self-driving car or an airplane is generally way more than that. So even though it's a complex spacecraft, it's still not that much.
All right. So when do you see humans setting foot on Titan or other planets' moon?
Ooh, setting foot on Titan. That's probably, I don't know that I'll get to live to see that. I hope I get to see people set foot on Mars. Titan's a much longer way to go.
Yeah, I agree. What would be the next logical mission after Dragonfly? Do you have your sights set on something already?
For me personally or for Titan?
For you.
Oh, for me. The interesting part about my career so far is I've really just been making it up as I go along. Different missions come up, different missions are awarded, studied by NASA. The Dragonfly mission, for example, would not have been possible 10 years ago. It's been advances in drone technology and control systems and batteries in speed controllers for motors that have enabled, from the consumer industry, enabled something like Dragonfly to exist. So if you asked me the question, would I want to work on a drone on Titan 10 years ago, it just would not have been possible. And so the missions that are possible 10 years from now, maybe I'll be working on something I can't even think of.
Yeah, I agree. But then you expect to work on the Dragonfly for the next,
5 years or so,
5
yeah,
years?
at least through launch. And then we've got about 6.5 years to actually get out to Titan. The way that things work at APL, we have many missions that we're working on. Actually, the DART mission, I did not work on, but several of my friends and colleagues did, and that'll hit an asteroid 1 week from today. And so very excited to see that happen. And so members of that mission worked on code for DART, and then DART launched, and then they came to work on Dragonfly for the last year. And so they're going to be very excited, of course, to see their spacecraft complete its mission in just another week. But different people will work on different missions all the time. Working on another mission called IMAP for NASA to study the sun. Dragonfly is our most recently awarded mission from NASA, but I'm sure a year or 2 or 3 from now we'll have something completely different.
So that sounds very fluid and very dynamic and very interesting. So
yes, yeah, no typical day, as I said earlier. Absolutely.
Well, that's great. It must be very rewarding.
Yep.
And if you were to give some advice to young scientists or students aiming for a career in space science, what would you recommend?
I'd say get your hands dirty. And what I mean by that is, don't just study in a classroom. Classroom work is great. You have to learn somewhere. But you also, especially for engineers or for scientists, you have to actually do. And so if you're involved in school, if there's a robotics club, if there's a working on cars, it doesn't have to be spacecraft, it doesn't have to be rockets. But engineers and scientists learn best by doing, by running an experiment, by building something real. Whether that's writing code for software engineers or designing circuit boards for electrical engineers or whatever else it is. I would say to those students, find an opportunity to use your skills and break things and learn from the failures and then build the next one.
And what if, all right, let's imagine a situation you're already involved with something, you have a lot of hobbies, you have a lot of very difficult study programs, then how would you cope with all the stressful and overwhelming situation? Because they arise, and sometimes it's very off-putting in science, like it's very exhausting.
It absolutely can be. Honestly, I wish I had good advice for that situation. I've been in some of those as well. It's important to strike a good balance. Sometimes things can be super competitive, but it's always worth knowing that either the goal at the end is worth it, or to understand that different balances have to be made. So,
and how do you balance? Do you do any sports or?
I like playing soccer, football, I guess, over here. Certainly, other things, video games, hiking, photography, bird watching, very calming hobby. And so photography and bird watching, definitely. But usually in the very stressful situations that I find at work, it's helpful to have a good team to work with, right? And so when the hardest parts of my career so far have really been when I've been working alone or felt more isolated. When I have a good team working with me like I do now, things get a lot easier.
Well, that sounds great. So what do you wish you knew early in your career?
That's a great question. I think what I wish I knew earlier is the importance of taking risks. When I was in college, I had my entire career planned out completely. And my actual career has turned out completely differently. My plan was totally wrong. Things have gone differently. Jobs have ended. I've gotten laid off from some of my jobs. Programs have been canceled. When I worked on Orion, and you mentioned the Constellation program earlier, Constellation got canceled. So I watched U.S. President Barack Obama on television saying that basically I didn't have a job anymore because I was working on the Orion program and that was getting canceled. So I would say that all of those things can be okay as long as you're willing to keep going and keep taking risks and keep working on the next big thing. Your actual career will turn out very differently than you expected.
That sounds a bit frustrating because I already have my plans.
Yep.
And I have my 10-year plan of what I want to accomplish, and you're just telling me that it's probably not going to work out.
Some people are way better at that than others. And I know some people that turned out exactly like that. They made a plan and they did it. And they did exactly what they wanted to do. My career has honestly turned out better than I expected, even though none of my plans worked. And so having the ability to adapt, having the ability to still take the next risk. One of my favorite quotes is from Dwight Eisenhower, U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower. Plans are worthless, but planning is indispensable. And so as a wartime general and as a U.S. president, he knew that plans changed. It was always worth thinking about the future, but never thinking that that's the only way that it had to happen. And so it's a useful lesson for life. It's a useful lesson for engineering projects. Plans are worthless, but planning is indispensable.
Well, that's a good advice. But if you could choose to do something completely different than you do right now, what would it be?
Probably something outside. That's the one thing that I don't like very much about my career is, it's mostly working in offices and not going out into the world very much. I am lucky at a place like APL and at places like Blue Origin. I usually get to help build the rockets and spacecraft, and so I'm not just sitting at my desk all day long. But I think if I had to do something differently for a career, maybe photography, maybe I'd go work as a river guide and go kayaking somewhere. I don't know.
Sounds peaceful. I think that's all of the questions I wanted to ask. So thank you for being with us today.
Absolutely.
It was great to have an inside look at your career, and we're looking forward to seeing all the things that you accomplish in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Pán Brandon Haber, tlmočil to niekto? Titulkovali to? Nenechali vás v tom? Rozumeli ste tomu? Dobre, lebo ešte jedna taká prednáška bude, ale už bude naživo, bude hodinová, bude veľmi pútavá, bude sa týkať futurológie, ale to až neskôr. Teraz sa budeme venovať ďalším veciam, ďalším prezentácii, výsostne aktuálnym veciam. Tie veci sa týkajú šetrenia elektrickej energie, lebo veľmi áno, mladí odchádzajú, lebo neplatia. Ostatní zostávajú, lebo sa ich to týka. Dobre, budeme sa rozprávať o tom, ako v tejto dobe, kedy tie energie naozaj veľmi extrémne stúpajú. Chcel som povedať, že oni nestúpajú veľmi, to je naozaj extrémne stúpanie. Je veľmi pravdepodobné teda, že nejaký postoj budeme musieť k tomu zaujať. Buď to bude šetrenie, alebo bude to úplne vyizolovanie niektorých spotrebičov, neviem. Všetko ukáže čas, ale pripraviť sa na to treba a pripravíme sa na to prednáškou, ktorú máme pripravenú, a to bude prednáška na tému zmysluplné šetrenie energie. A ja som veľmi rád, že na pódiu privítam pána Michala Iloviča zo Slovenskej inovačnej a energetickej agentúry. Dobrý deň vám prajem. Máte tu aj fanklub, áno. Točte ho. Dobrý deň, nech sa páči.
Dobrý deň. Takže ako už bolo povedané, moje meno je Michal Ilovič a mojou dnešnou úlohou je vám predstaviť túto atraktívnu tému, dobre, tak nie až takú atraktívnu tému, úspory energie a šetrenie energiou. Myslím, že som mal dostať ešte kliker, aby som si mohol prepínať prezentáciu. Nemám kliker.